Friday the 13th is an iconic slasher film that everyone has heard of. It is up there with the Halloween series, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream. Surprisingly, many people who haven't seen the entire series would be shocked to learn that Jason Voorhees, as we know him, isn't even in the first movie. You'll see a glimpse of him at one point, but it's not the masked serial killer everyone thinks about when they hear his name. He doesn't come into play until part 2. Spoiler alert for those who have never seen the first film. The actual antagonist in Friday the 13th is not Jason, but his mother, who is seeking revenge for her son Jason's death years ago. He drowned in Camp Crystal Lake, and she is hell-bent on revenge against any camp counselor who is unlucky enough to come onto the property. This movie isn't nearly as well remembered as the rest of the series, but it's still fun to watch and talk about. One of the more memorable things about the film is that it was one of Kevin Bacon's earliest roles. You see him pop up in the beginning of the movie, and he remains throughout the film until there is a shocking scene involving the mattress. You know what scene I'm talking about, I'm sure. People say Friday the 13th copied Halloween, but I don't think so. Maybe starting with part 2, when Jason took over as the antagonist, it began to try cashing in on Michael Myers' craze, but the first film just feels more like a whodunit slasher to me. I don't like it as much as most of the other movies in the series, but it's pretty fun little slasher with some creative kills. I like the seemingly crazy old man who warns the kids about the camp's dark past. He even shows up in part 2. He's the sort of crazy character that always seems to show up in slasher films. But is he really crazy? Or is he right? I really like the atmosphere of the early 1980s slasher movies. I know they mostly seem generic and unoriginal, but they have a cozy atmosphere where it really feels like you're at a quiet summer camp huddled by a fire. That kind of place where nothing bad will happen, where you're just having some fun away from home, free to do anything. But of course, bad things do begin to happen. In fact, not long after arriving to the camp, all hell breaks loose, and that is trend that each movie in the series follows. I think that people who know about Jason and haven't watched the series yet might be disappointed when they watch the original Friday the 13th. They might even find it boring, especially the younger audience, because it isn't as fast-paced as modern horror films. Another reason they might find it boring is because Jason isn't really in the movie. But I think that's what makes it intriguing. It's interesting to watch how the series started out. If I had watched this movie in theater in 1980, I don't think I would ever have predicted what would come next for the series, a huge franchise with 10 entries. I don't think anyone would have predicted that, but Friday the 13th was an enormous box office hit. It made around $60 million worldwide, and that was incredible considering that film's budget was supposedly a little over $500,000. No wonder they decided to make as many movies as possible. It was a great money maker. And I'm glad they did, because even if the movies aren't really masterpieces, they're all very fun. Some more so than others. But we'll get the sequels later on. I'll make videos about each of them. For now, we'll just talk about the first movie. Even though Jason doesn't really show up as we know him in this movie, the film introduces the atmosphere we all know from the franchise. A quiet, nearly deserted summer camp with a tranquil-looking lake. Young camp counselor away from home, feeling like they're about to have the time of their lives as they arrive at camp, having no idea what awaits them there. and bombastic, creepy music filling your ears. That brings up the film's score. Harry Manfredini was the composer, and in my opinion, he crafted one of the greatest theme songs of all time for Jason. Not just famous but the violins, viola, cello, and bass. They sound so memorable and are very anxiety-inducing, always playing as characters. Often the final girl runs through the woods screaming for their lives. It is a very loud, dramatic theme, and there is nothing subtle about it, nor does there need to be. The chaotic nature of the music fits with the chaotic nature of the kills. I think it's nice having a very classical sounding score for a film like this. They could have easily gotten a cheap composer who might have whipped up a generic, tacky sounding score in 5 minutes that no one would remember. But Harry Manfredini's operatic score sounds like it could be played in an opera house. Even though I love synthesizer music, especially in horror movies, I think it's so cool how Friday the 13th doesn't really use it, other than some later entries, for instance Part 2 and 3, which have nice remixes of the original score that's with synthesizers. One strange and sometimes distracting thing about the series is how each film uses a different filming location for Camp Crystal Lake. The first film is the only one that was shot in New Jersey, which is where Camp Crystal Lake is supposed to be located. Part 2 was filmed in Connecticut, while Part 3 and 4 were filmed in Southern California, which was interesting and very scenic, but of course it didn't have that northeastern atmosphere that first two films had. Some of the later entries were shot in South, which I think gave them even less atmosphere than the California film entries, especially Part 7, which I think was really lacking in mood and atmosphere. Part 6, however, did a good job of creating a creepy, foggy atmosphere despite being filmed in the South. But the location in the first film, as well as Part 2, is iconic. Someday I would like to visit the original camp. I wonder if I would feel a little creeped out walking around there, or if it would feel just like any other camp. I think if I was there at night, it might be a little creepy. I would have keep checking behind me, make sure that Jason or Pamela weren't around. The movie has some memorable kills, but not as memorable as kills in the sequels. Well, except for one or two, one of which involves an arrow and a mattress, and the other involves a flying head near the end. Betsy Palmer is very memorable antagonist. I'm not familiar with the work she did before working on this film, but from what I read, I think that role of Pamela Voorhees was very different from the type of roles she played when she was younger, so it almost feels like a fun bit of stunt casting they did by hiring her. She truly had manic, insane-looking her eyes, and her reveal near the end was truly creepy. Sure, she isn't as much of a threat as Jason, but she definitely holds her own, and I definitely would not want to come across her in dark alley or campground. Let's talk about final girl, Alice. I think she is an excellent final girl. Smart, resourceful, strong-willed, and unwilling to go down without a fight. The climactic scene between her and Pamela Voorhees is memorable, and although I knew she would have to come out on top, I won't lie, I was a little nervous because Pamela was absolutely crazy. The legendary Tom Savini did the makeup for the movie, and he did not disappoint. Later he would go on to do even more impressive makeup for Part 4, but I think his creation of young Jason is one of the memorable things in the entire series. When you look at him, you feel a mixture of emotions, a bit of shameful disgust, fear, sadness, and pity. I think the design is perfect for the character, and Savini also got to show off his skills with all of the kills throughout the film. Friday the 13th got terrible reviews when it was released, but that isn't surprising for 1980s slasher. Despite the bad reviews they tended to get, I still love them. While I won't say it's necessarily a great movie, I don't think it's trying to be. It's simply trying to be fun. I like it because I think it's an effective whodunit slasher with a shocking twist, and of course I like how it spawned the famous character of Jason Voorhees, who would go on slash his way through many other films in the series. I was never bored while watching it. While I don't think part 1 is as memorable as many of the other films, I think it is far better movies than some. Although it is not nearly as good as others, like part 4 and part 6. I look forward to talking about all the other entries in future videos, especially my 2 favorite entries. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you find yourself in forest at night, don't linger around too long. Someone might be coming up behind you.